This time, look at Moto Guzzi's V7. Now, Moto Guzzi's advertising blurb will tell you that V7's been around since the late 60s. But this isn't really the case, because the machine we call the V7 today is in fact an evolution of the small block V35 and V50s, as you see here, from the late 70s, and not from 10 years earlier. These machines are simpler and much lighter than those early big block engines. The V75 engine uses a Heron head, or at least up until the Mark II. Mark III uses a different engine completely. And although it looks similar to the large block engines, it is very different. And with the exception of the odd nut and bolt, shares no major components whatsoever. So although the modern V7 is a modern classic, and it mirrors the image of the original V7 Sport of the 1970s, it actually is not descended from that machine at all. The V7 is essentially Moto Guzzi's equivalent to the Triumph Bonneville or Royal Enfield's new range of 650s. These are great machines, simple and basic, using traditional looking clocks and switches, eschewing the new trend for LCD screens and adjustable rider modes. Instead, what it offers is a back to basics motorcycle, one that's becoming very popular these days. It's interesting to compare the V7 with Honda's CB500 range. Both machines are A2 compatible after all, and they're approximately the same weight also. However, the steering geometry of the V7 is completely different. It's much nearer that of a Harley-Davidson Sportster. Consequently, the bike steers slowly, but is very stable. That's not to say the bike doesn't handle well, it just doesn't feel as nimble as the Honda. It's basically, imagine a Harley Sportster with a lot less weight and better suspension, and a better riding position, and you're about there. The suspension uses the usual twin shock setup at the rear, and telescopic forks at the front. There's no adjustment on the front, but there is adjustment on the rear. Overall, let's say, the suspension's on the firm side. This is fairly usual on Guzzis of this type, as it has to deal with the torque reaction of the rear shaft drive. There's ABS brakes, but it's just a single disc on the front, and this requires a good heave to get the bike stopped. But for the type of riding that the bike's designed for, I'd say they were adequate. The sitting position is fairly typical for a bike in this class, and while it has a low seat height to accommodate shorter riders, there's enough room to accommodate 6-footers too. The seat's a little bit firm, and it's a little short too if you're carrying a passenger. Also, the rear legroom for a passenger is not that great. That said, it's certainly not the worst in class. You can certainly tour on this bike. It's comfortable enough, and it has shaft drive of course, which adds to convenience. Also, the fuel tank is quite large, so you have a range of a good 200 miles between fill-ups, and the lazy, torquey engine makes cruising along feel quite effortless. The engine is a 744cc V-twin. It's very torquey when you compare it to the Honda, although it doesn't feel as if it's got the same top-end rush. It has a 6-speed gearbox, and this feeds through traction control via a dry clutch. The dry clutch is quite grabby and can take some getting used to people who aren't used to riding Guzzi's. But after a few miles, you just take it for granted, so it's a normal part of the bike's character, if you like. Contrary to popular belief, the gear engagement is very nice and smooth, and it's much better than the early Moto Guzzi's, which could feel somewhat agricultural at times. And compared to Honda's CB engine, the bike can feel very torquey low down, and unfortunately it seems to run out of steam higher up the rev range. Also, there can be some vibration at certain RPMs, and this is notable at around 55 miles an hour. But this smooths out as the revs build, and at motorway speeds, it's very smooth indeed. The real plus side to these bikes is the low maintenance involved. The overhead valves are easy to service and can be done even without removing the petrol tank. And the shaft drive means, well, there's no chain to clean or lube. All of this makes for a very easy bike to live with. As my wife found, it's a great alternative to Harley Davidson Sportsters. It's more nimble, much lighter, whilst exuding that same mechanical character that the Harleys also possess. And like the Harley, they're also air-cooled twins, so they're quite rattly in motion, quite noisy, and also they run quite hot too. But the layout of a Guzzi engine allows them to cool much more efficiently than the Harley does. I would describe the Guzzi as a true modern classic. It's a warts and all, truly engaging motorcycle, and is very different from Triumph's Bonneville, which is really a modern bike in drag. In fairness, I've been riding Guzzis most of my adult life, and whilst that might make me somewhat biased, I have to say the reason I've ridden them for so long is because I can't find another machine that's quite as engaging, quite as enjoyable to ride, quite the same all-round package that any Moto Guzzi is. Really are my favourite motorcycles. I would advise everybody to try and ride a Moto Guzzi at least once in their lives. After all, you never know. You too may find the same passion that I have. But would my wife go back to a Harley Sportster? Definitely not. Go!